Welcome to Tochi Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The air inside the cramped, poorly ventilated room felt heavier than usual. Chioma sat on the edge of the threadbare mattress, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Her heart pounded violently against her chest as her uncle's voice echoed from the sitting room. She couldn't make out every word, but she heard enough to send ice running through her veins. It settled. The girl will marry him. The money must come today. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision as the reality sank deeper. Her own blood had sold her, not for love, not for her future, but for the weight of his gambling debts. There was no mother to run to, no father to protect her. The graves that held them also held her childhood, her safety, and her freedom. Her uncle stormed into the room moments later, his face twisted with a mixture of frustration and greed. "Get dressed," he barked, throwing a worn-out wrapper at her. "You should be grateful. A billionaire wants to marry you. Do you know how many girls pray for this kind of opportunity?" His words sliced through her like daggers. She wanted to scream, to fight, to curse the heavens for the cruel twist of fate. But her voice failed her, swallowed by the suffocating fear gripping her. Trembling, she managed to stammer, "But I don't even know him. Uncle, please. I beg you." But begging only fueled his rage. A resounding slap landed across her face, sending her crashing to the floor. "You are nobody. An orphan I've fed for years. You will do as I say or end up on the streets," he snarled before slamming the door shut. Hours later, Chioma was shoved into an old car with no idea where it was headed. Her heart raced with each turn, every bump in the road making her stomach twist tighter. When the car finally stopped in front of a colossal glass building, her mouth fell open in shock. The towering edifice screamed wealth, polished floors, marble pillars, and uniformed guards who eyed her with subtle disdain. She was dragged into an office larger than any home she'd ever known. Behind the desk sat Brian Okafor, a tall, intimidating man with skin as smooth as polished ebony, eyes as cold as winter, and a face carved from arrogance itself. He didn't even bother looking at her properly. Instead, he signed a document with a lazy flick of his wrist and muttered, "Just get this over with." Chioma's stomach knotted, her soul shattered. Her life, in that moment, was no longer hers. The wedding was nothing short of a transaction. No flowers, no music, no joy. Only a table with papers waiting to be signed and a judge looking uncomfortable as he recited vows that meant nothing to anyone present. Chioma stood there in a borrowed gown 2 sizes too big, her feet wobbling like a leaf in a storm. Brian didn't even glance at her as he recited his parts with rehearsed disinterest, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, as though being forced to acknowledge her presence was beneath him. When it was her turn to speak, her lips trembled. Her eyes searched for a single familiar face, but there was none. Not even her uncle bothered to stay beyond collecting the check. The silence that followed her whispered, "I do," was deafening. After the cold, soulless ceremony, Brian led her straight to his sleek, black SUV. His expression remained blank as he scrolled through his phone, not sparing her a single glance. "Listen carefully," he finally said, his voice sharp and emotionless. "This is not a marriage. This is a contract. You are here because my father's will demands it. Don't mistake your presence in my house for importance." His words felt like nails hammered into her chest. Chioma turned her face to the window, hiding the tears that burned her eyes. The Lagos traffic outside moved slower than her heartbeat, every car horn echoing the suffocating truth. She was no longer free. When the car finally pulled into the gates of Brian's mansion, Chioma's breath caught. The estate was breathtaking, marble driveways, fountains, and gardens that looked straight out of a fairy tale. But as the gates closed behind them, she realized it wasn't a fairy tale. It was a prison wrapped in gold. The guards didn't smile. The staff barely acknowledged her. Brian's mother, an elegantly dressed woman dripping with disdain, eyed Chioma like one with a stain on fine fabric. "So this is the girl," she sneered. "At least she looks humble enough. Keep her where she belongs, far from sight." Chioma's fingers clenched the folds of her gown tightly. Her nightmare was only just beginning. The door slammed behind her, echoing like thunder in the empty guest room, or rather, the servants' quarters Brian had assigned her to. The space was small, suffocating, with faded curtains, a tiny single bed, and a cracked mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. There were no personal touches, no warmth, just cold, empty walls that matched the tone of her so-called husband's heart. As she sat on the thin mattress, silent tears slipped down her cheeks. Her eyes scanned the room as if searching for a way out, but the only window faced a tall concrete fence lined with barbed wires. Freedom was a luxury far beyond her reach. Later that evening, a sharp knock startled her. Before she could answer, the door flew open, revealing Brian with a glass of wine in his hand, exuding entitlement from every pore. He didn't step inside. He didn't need to. His words were enough to invade her space, her mind, her soul. "Get this straight," he began, voice dripping with arrogance. "You will not enter my bedroom. You will not speak to me unless spoken to. You will eat when told. You will be invisible. Play your role until the contract is over, then disappear back to whatever gutter you came from." The sting of his words was sharper than any slap. Her throat tightened, but no words came. Only silence and pain. When dinner was served in the grand dining hall that night, Chioma was not invited to the table. She was ordered by the housekeeper to eat in the kitchen, the same space reserved for staff. The cooks whispered behind her back, some pitying, most sneering. When Brian walked past, he didn't even glance her way. He sat at the grand table with his friends, laughing, drinking, and pretending his legally wedded wife did not exist. As Chioma chewed her tasteless food, her tears threatened to drown her. She realized with crushing certainty that the mansion wasn't just a house. It was a cage, and she was the prisoner he bought. The evening air was filled with the sounds of laughter that did not belong to her. Chioma stood frozen by the kitchen doorway, her trembling hands clutching a tray of wine glasses. From the large glass doors leading into the living room, she could see Brian sprawled comfortably on the couch, his arm wrapped tightly around the waist of a light-skinned lady clad in a dangerously short gown. There were others too, 3 women giggling, tossing their Brazilian weaves, sipping champagne as if they owned the world. Chioma's throat tightened as one of the women straddled Brian, whispering something into his ear that made him chuckle. His eyes briefly flickered in her direction, cold, sharp, before he waved lazily at her like she was nothing more than an errand girl. "Hey, you come here. Bring the drinks and make sure there's something to eat for my guests," he ordered, his tone sharp and dismissive. Her feet moved, not because she wanted them to, but because refusing meant consequences she wasn't ready to face. As she approached, the women's gazes scanned her from head to toe, their expressions laced with contempt and mockery. "Is that the wife?" One of them laughed, flicking her acrylic nails. Another scoffed. "Wife? No way. Looks more like a maid." Their laughter was cruel, deliberate, and loud enough to sting. Brian didn't correct them. In fact, he smirked, sipping his wine as if their insults were music to his ears. "She's just here for paperwork," he responded casually, his arm tightening around the waist of the girl sitting on him. Chioma felt her knees weaken, but she forced them to stay upright. She handed them the drinks, her hands shaking so badly that one glass nearly tipped over. "Careful," Brian hissed, his eyes narrowing. "Don't embarrass me more than you already do." When she turned to leave, Brian's voice echoed again, sharp and merciless. "Chioma, don't forget. Prepare dinner. My guests are hungry. And make it quick." The words hit harder than a slap. She bit down on her trembling lips, swallowing the lump in her throat as she dragged her feet back toward the kitchen. The cooks looked at her with a mixture of pity and amusement, but offered no help. Alone, Chioma prepared the meal, her tears mixing with the onions she chopped, her heart breaking with every stir of the pot. From the distance, the laughter, the flirtatious moans, and the clinking of glasses floated into the kitchen, each sound carving deeper wounds into her soul. As she placed the finished dishes on a tray, she stared at her reflection in the silver tray, a broken girl wearing the mask of strength she didn't feel. Her reality was now serving the women her own husband chose over her, in her own home. The next morning came with no relief, only dread. Chioma tried to stay invisible, hoping that maybe if she avoided Brian's line of sight, her day would pass without humiliation. But the walls of the mansion had ears and eyes, all controlled by Brian's iron grip. When one of the gardeners, a kind old man named Babasani, offered her a small smile and whispered, "Sorry, my child. God sees you," Brian noticed. The following afternoon, Babasani was dragged off the property by 2 security guards. His pleas echoed through the compound. "Please, sir, please," he begged, falling to his knees. Brian didn't flinch. "Pack him out of here. I don't want rats in my house," Brian spat coldly, watching without an ounce of remorse as the elderly man was thrown out like garbage. Chioma stood by the corner, her hands covering her mouth, her heart breaking. Her only source of comfort was punished simply for being kind. It didn't end there. A young housemaid, Amara, once offered Chioma a plate of extra food when she noticed Chioma hadn't eaten all day. Brian saw it. The very next morning, Amara was fired, her final paycheck withheld. Her mistake? Offering decency to someone Brian had deliberately reduced to a shadow. The message became clear. Anyone who dared show Chioma compassion would suffer. Fear spread among the staff like wildfire. Where once they offered her pitiful glances, now they avoided her entirely. They walked past her as though she didn't exist, terrified of losing their jobs, their freedom, or worse. Even the security guards, who once gave her brief nods, now stared through her like she was a ghost haunting the halls of the mansion. The isolation was suffocating. The walls felt like they were closing in, shrinking her existence with every passing day. Her phone was confiscated on day 1. She had no contact with the outside world. She wasn't allowed to step outside the compound gates unless Brian gave permission, which he never did. Once in desperation, Chioma attempted to sneak out through the back gate. She barely made it 3 steps beyond before Brian's guards caught her. Brian's punishment wasn't physical that day. It was psychological. He dragged her into the living room in front of his friends and girlfriends, forced her to kneel, and humiliated her like a criminal. "You can leave if you like," he sneered, "but remember, I own you now. Anyone who finds you will know you belong to Brian Okafor. No one will help you. Not in this city. Not anywhere." His words were chains. Heavy, suffocating chains. As days melted into weeks, Chioma began to lose track of time. Morning was just the start of another round of humiliation. Afternoon was filled with the sounds of Brian entertaining women, business associates, or friends, none of whom acknowledged her presence. Night was the worst, the endless echo of laughter, moaning, and footsteps down hallways that should have been quiet for a married couple. But this wasn't a marriage. It was a sentence, one without parole. Her body remained in the mansion, but her spirit was slipping further away, piece by piece. She spent most nights curled in her tiny servant's bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering how life had become this cruel. The worst blow came one evening when Brian hosted a lavish house party. The mansion was filled with Lagos elites, influencers, businessmen, and women clad in glitter and gold. Chioma was ordered to help serve the guests, not as the wife of the house, but as a server. As she moved through the crowd with trays of wine, she overheard snippets of gossip. "Isn't that Brian's wife? She looks so plain. I thought he married a socialite, not this?" The whispers felt like acid on her skin. Brian noticed. Oh, he noticed. He made no effort to stop it. Instead, he played into it, laughing with his friends, allowing his current date, a tall model, to sit on his lap in full view of everyone, including Chioma. When their eyes met, he didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He smirked, as if to say, "Yes, watch. Know your place." But that night, as the party raged, something inside Chioma shifted. The pain was still there, raw, bleeding, unbearable. But beneath it, a seed of resolve began to sprout. She realized that if she continued like this, she would either die, emotionally, physically, or lose the very last shred of her sanity. Brian had stripped her of her dignity, her voice, her existence. But there was one thing he hadn't taken yet, her will to survive. She didn't know how. She didn't know when. But deep in her trembling chest, she whispered to herself for the first time since this nightmare began, "I won't die here. I won't let this be my end." Her bruised dignity might be barely standing, but it was still there. The storm that evening wasn't just in the sky. It raged within the walls of Brian's mansion, too. The clouds grumbled as heavy rain lashed against the windows, almost mimicking the chaos brewing inside the house. Chioma sat quietly in her little room, hugging her knees, her heart pounding. She had heard Brian's voice growing louder through the night, shouting on the phone, hurling insults, and slamming doors. His rage was unmatched tonight. She could only guess that one of his deals hadn't gone the way he wanted, but she knew all too well what that meant. Someone in the house would suffer for it. She prayed it wouldn't be her. But prayers, she was learning, often went unanswered in this place. Her hands trembled when she heard the sound of heavy footsteps marching toward her door. Before she could even brace herself, it flung open violently. Brian stood there, his eyes bloodshot from alcohol, his shirt half open, and a sinister smirk carved onto his lips. "Look who's pretending to be asleep," he slurred, staggering in. Chioma immediately stood, backing away toward the corner of the room like a trapped animal. Please? Brian, please." Her voice broke before it could form proper sentences. But her pleading only seemed to fuel his drunken fury. "Do you think you can embarrass me?" "Huh," he growled, stepping closer. "Do you think sitting here sulking all day makes you better? You're nothing, Chioma. A charity case. You belong here because of my father's stupid will, nothing else." His hands grabbed her wrist with such force that she cried out. He shoved her toward the bed. She fought back, struggling, pushing against him with all her strength, but his strength overpowered hers. The screams that followed were swallowed by the thunder outside. No one came. No one dared. The staff had long learned to turn a deaf ear when Brian exploded like this. Chioma cried, not just from the pain, but from the soul-crushing realization that she truly was alone. When he was done, he stood, adjusted his shirt as though nothing had happened, and threw one last insult over his shoulder. "You better clean yourself up. You look disgusting," he spat before slamming the door shut. Chioma lay there broken. Her body hurt, but the pain inside her chest was worse. She curled into herself, trembling, sobbing until her throat was raw. In that moment, something shattered completely inside her. Whatever innocence, whatever flicker of hope had remained, was now gone. This wasn't just a bad marriage, it was a war zone. And she was the casualty. Days passed after that night, but the memories did not fade. Chioma avoided mirrors, avoided her reflection, and avoided everyone. Every glance at herself reminded her of how powerless she was. Her body ached in places she couldn't describe, not just physically, but emotionally. Yet, beneath the suffocating weight of her trauma, something felt different. Her stomach felt unsettled, her appetite was non-existent, and for 3 mornings straight, she woke up with nausea. She brushed it off as stress at first, until a sudden realization made her blood run cold. Her periods, they hadn't come. Her hands trembled as she tried to count the days on her fingers. Could it be? No. God, no. But the more she thought about it, the more the truth cornered her. Her heart raced as she sneaked into the staff quarters and bribed one of the younger maids to buy her a pregnancy test. She couldn't go herself. Brian's guards would never allow her to step out alone. When the girl returned, she clutched the small package like it was a ticking bomb. She locked herself in the bathroom, her hands shaking as she opened the packet. Time seemed to freeze as she waited, staring at the small window on the test. And then 2 lines. 2 bold, merciless lines. Her breath caught. Her knees buckled. The room spun as the walls seemed to close in on her. "No, no, no," she whispered, pressing a hand against her belly. But the reality stared back, cruel and undeniable. She was pregnant, with the child of the man who treated her worse than an animal. For a moment, she considered hiding it. Maybe if she wore baggy clothes, maybe if she avoided Brian's gaze. But fate, it seemed, had a different plan. That evening, Brian barged into her room, already in a foul mood. His sharp eyes scanned her face, noticed the fear, the flushed skin, the trembling hands. "What are you hiding?" he snapped, stepping closer. Chioma tried to shake her head, but her silence betrayed her. His eyes narrowed, then darted to the bathroom. And there, lying in plain sight on the sink, was the pregnancy test. His face twisted in fury. He grabbed it, looked at the two bold lines, then spun around to face her. "You filthy snake," he roared, throwing the test at her face. "So this was your plan? Trap me with a child? Tie me down? Do you think this changes anything?" His hands balled into fists, and for a terrifying moment, Chioma thought he might hit her. Her arms wrapped protectively around her stomach instinctively. This child, innocent yet, was already fighting for survival. The days that followed were a whirlwind of terror. Brian's verbal abuse escalated to new heights, and his threats became more vicious. He accused Chioma of deliberately getting pregnant to trap him, as if she had any power in this prison masquerading as a marriage. "You're disgusting," he spat one afternoon, pacing the living room while Chioma stood frozen by the doorway, trembling. "You think carrying my child changes your status here? You're still nothing. A useless, gold-digging dirty orphan." Every word was a dagger. His mother, seated elegantly by the window, didn't intervene. In fact, she sipped her tea with a satisfied smile, as if Brian's cruelty was music to her ears. Chioma stood there, hands subconsciously protecting her belly, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Please for the baby." Her plea only seemed to ignite something darker in Brian. His eyes flashed with rage. Without warning, he lunged toward her, his hands pushing her hard against the wall. Her head hit the frame with a sickening thud, and before she could gather herself, his leg swung, landing a brutal kick to her side, dangerously close to her belly. Chioma gasped. The pain was blinding. She crumpled to the floor, clutching her stomach, crying out as the pain radiated through her entire body. Brian hovered above her, fists clenched, breathing heavily as if weighing whether to continue. "Get up," he barked. "Get out of my sight before I finish what I started." Chioma dragged herself away, her hands protectively around her belly, praying, begging, that the tiny life inside her would survive. She made it back to her small room, her entire body shaking, her side throbbing with each breath. Collapsing on the bed, she sobbed uncontrollably, whispering to her unborn child, "Please hold on, please don't leave me." Her mind raced. This was no longer about enduring emotional pain. This was life or death, not just hers, but her baby's too. Her tears soaked the pillow as dread consumed her. If she stayed here, if she continued living under Brian's roof, there was no guarantee she, or her child, would survive. The realization hit her with full force. She had to leave. Somehow. Some way. No matter the cost. Chioma lay on her tiny mattress, staring blankly at the cracked ceiling, her hands protectively wrapped around her bruised abdomen. Every breath was painful. Every shift in position sent sharp reminders of the brutality Brian had unleashed. But this pain, as excruciating as it was, couldn't drown out the louder voice in her mind. "If you stay here, your baby will die, and so will you." Her tears had dried. What remained was a strange mixture of fear and fierce determination. The bruises would heal. But if she didn't leave, she knew the next kick might not just bruise, it would kill. Her baby's faint flutter, a sign of life, gave her the strength she never knew she had. Tonight. It had to be tonight. There was no other option. She waited until midnight, when the mansion usually drowned in silence, and Brian was either passed out drunk or entertaining women in his private lounge upstairs. Her heart raced violently as she slowly opened her door, peeking into the hallway. The usual security guard that patrolled the corridor was missing, probably reassigned to watch the front entrance, assuming no one would be foolish enough to attempt escape through the servants' quarters. Quietly, Chioma tiptoed down the hallway, her hands trembling as she clutched a small bag she had managed to pack with the little she owned, a wrapper, a bottle of water, and the ultrasound picture she had secretly obtained weeks ago when Brian allowed her to visit the hospital only to confirm the pregnancy was real. That picture, the tiny image of the life growing inside her, was her anchor now. She slipped through the back kitchen, praying the cook hadn't set the alarm tonight. Luck favored her. The side kitchen door was unlocked, probably left open by the cleaners earlier that day. But just as she thought she was in the clear, a voice barked from behind. "Where do you think you're going?" Panic surged as she spun around to see one of the junior guards approaching. Her knees threatened to buckle. But then, a miracle. Mama Nkechi, the oldest housemaid, appeared from the shadows. "Leave her," the woman snapped at the guard, surprising both Chioma and the man. Mr. Bryan said she should go get something from a pharmacy. Don't waste time questioning his wife. Her tone was firm, her eyes daring the man to argue. Confused but unwilling to risk Bryan's wrath, the guard grumbled and walked away. Mama Nkechi quickly grabbed Chioma's hand, squeezed it tightly, and whispered, "Run, my daughter. Don't ever come back here. Save that baby. Save yourself." With tears flooding her eyes, Chioma nodded, whispered a broken thank you, and fled into the night, her bare feet pounding the wet pavement, her lungs burning as freedom finally tasted possible. The streets of Lagos at night were a cruel paradox, both empty and overwhelming. Chioma ran until her legs trembled, weaving through alleyways, dodging drunken men, beggars, and reckless okadas that sped past without regard. The rain had left the road slick, and her feet slipped more than once. Her hands tightened around her belly with every stumble, whispering desperate promises to her unborn child. "We're going to be okay, please hold on," but her strength was running on fumes. Her body, already battered and malnourished, couldn't sustain much more. Her vision blurred. Her head felt dizzy. The world tilted dangerously before darkness threatened to swallow her whole. Just as her legs gave out and her knees slammed against the harsh gravel, a pair of headlights appeared, slowing to a stop just feet away. A voice, deep and concerned, rang out. Hey, are you okay?" Chioma barely registered the words. She lifted her head weakly to see a tall, dark-skinned man jump out of an old battered Toyota Corolla. His clothes were stained with engine grease, his hands rough, his hair disheveled. Clearly a man who worked with his hands. "Please help," she croaked before everything went black. Without a second thought, the man, Michael, rushed to her side, lifting her as gently as he could. His eyes widened as he noticed her swollen belly. "Oh God, she's pregnant," he muttered, panic rising in his chest. He carefully placed her in the back seat of his car, grabbed an old rag to wipe the rain off her face, and drove off, praying she would hold on until they got somewhere safe. Michael's small apartment wasn't much, a one-room space tucked behind a mechanic workshop, but it was safe, warm, and free from the nightmare Chioma had just escaped. As he laid her gently on his only mattress, he noticed her bruises, dark blotches on her arms, her legs, and worse still, on the side of her belly. His hands shook as he touched her forehead. Who would do this to a pregnant woman? As dawn began to peek over the horizon, Chioma's eyes fluttered open. Panic set in immediately. "Where am I?" she gasped, struggling to sit up. Easy, you're safe," Michael soothed, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I saw you collapse on the road. I couldn't just leave you there." His voice was warm, honest, and filled with a kindness Chioma hadn't heard in what felt like forever. And for the first time since her nightmare began, her body, tense and coiled, finally began to relax. A stranger had shown her more humanity than her own husband ever had. The first few days at Michael's place felt like waking from a bad dream, but finding herself unsure if the nightmare was truly over. Chioma barely spoke. She spent most hours curled on the mattress, hands resting on her belly, occasionally flinching from the phantom pain of memories that haunted her more than her physical wounds. Michael, respecting her silence, didn't push. Instead, he provided quietly, bringing bowls of hot pepper soup, clean water, and plain rice whenever he could. He didn't have much. His workshop barely made enough to feed himself. Yet he didn't hesitate to share every crumb, every drop, and every ounce of comfort he could offer. Watching him work tirelessly, sometimes till midnight, only to return and ask softly, "Did you eat today?" chipped slowly at the icy wall around Chioma's heart. It wasn't just the food. It was the fact that for the first time in a long while, no one shouted at her. No one raised a hand to her. No one spat insults at her like daggers. Michael would patch tires in the blazing sun, fix engines with grease staining his palms, then return to find her exactly where he left her, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. He never complained. He never pried. "You don't have to tell me what happened," he said once, sitting beside her, but not too close. "But whatever it is, it's not your fault." Those words made Chioma cry harder than she ever had before, not because they hurt, but because she realized she had forgotten what kindness sounded like. Slowly, Chioma began to open up. It started with small things. She offered to sweep the room. Then she washed some of his clothes while he was away, just to feel useful. Michael came home, saw the clean clothes, and smiled. A genuine, warm smile that felt like sunlight after years of darkness. "You don't have to, but thank you," he said softly. That evening, as they shared a meal of boiled yam and palm oil, Chioma whispered, "My name is Chioma." Her voice was fragile, but Michael nodded with a grin. "I'm Michael and you're safe here, Chioma. I swear it on my life." And for the first time in what felt like eternity, Chioma dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, kindness still existed in this cruel world. The walls of Brian's mansion trembled with rage, his rage. Papers flew across the room, wine glasses shattered against the marble floor, and terrified servants scurried like rats, dodging the hurricane of destruction unfolding before them. "Find her," Brian bellowed, slamming his fists against the grand oak table in his study. His face was contorted with fury, veins bulging on his neck, his usually well-groomed appearance disheveled. He paced back and forth, gripping his phone so tightly it looked ready to snap. "How did this even happen?" he roared at no one in particular. His mother sat silently on the sofa, sipping her tea, her expression a mixture of annoyance and cold amusement. "I warned you not to marry that gutter rat. Look how she's embarrassing us," she sneered. But Brian wasn't listening. His entire world was on fire, because one thing was very clear: Chioma was gone. And it wasn't just personal. This wasn't just about pride or bruised ego. His inheritance, his billion-dollar empire, was now on the line. The contract his father left was airtight. The conditions were clear. Brian had to remain married for a specific number of years to a morally upright, humble woman. Any divorce or separation before that period would invalidate the contract, and he would lose control of the company. A company he had spent years expanding. A company that made him untouchable. Now, that control was dangling by a thread because Chioma, the girl he'd treated like dirt, had done the unthinkable. She'd left. He slammed his hand on the intercom, barking orders at his head of security. "I want her found. Check every hospital, every police station, every bus park. I don't care if you have to turn Lagos upside down. Find her." His face darkened even further. "And anyone helping her, destroy them. I don't care how." Within hours, Brian's influence began to spread like a virus. Police officers, most of whom were in his pocket, were dispatched with vague descriptions of a missing wife. Flyers went up in street corners, but not the usual kind. These weren't pleas for help. These were wanted notices disguised as concern. Markets were raided, bus stations searched, and random street vendors were harassed for information. People who even mentioned seeing a heavily pregnant woman were dragged in for questioning. Some were threatened. Others were beaten. But no one could give a solid answer, because Chioma had vanished like smoke in the wind. And that drove Brian mad. Each failed lead, each dead end made his fury grow sharper, darker. "She thinks she can hide from me," he hissed, staring out of his office window, his hands clenched into fists. "She has no idea who she's dealing with. I own this city. She will come back, dead or alive." Miles away from the mansion and the chaos unfolding, Chioma sat on a wooden stool inside Michael's workshop, her hands unconsciously rubbing her belly. Her face was calmer now, though the storm of fear behind her eyes never fully faded. She glanced at Michael, who was bent over the engine of a customer's car, grease staining his hands, face furrowed in concentration. His kindness still felt unreal, a strange contrast to the brutality she had escaped. Yet, as the minutes turned into hours, an uneasiness crept in. She could feel it. Something was shifting in the air, a heaviness, an unspoken warning. And then it happened. A woman from the neighboring compound rushed into the workshop, panting. Michael, they're looking for a pregnant girl. They've gone to the bus stop, the market, even the clinics, men in suits, police, they're everywhere. Chioma's blood ran cold. Her hands gripped her belly tighter, her legs trembling beneath her. Michael stood upright, wiping his hands quickly on a rag, his jaw tightening. Are you sure? He asked the woman, who nodded frantically. They're asking everyone, showing a picture. Her face. Your workshop isn't safe anymore. They're spreading fast. The words hit like a punch to the chest. Chioma staggered, tears pooling in her eyes. Michael, he's coming for me. Her voice broke into a whisper. Her lungs constricted, panic swelling inside her chest so quickly that she could hardly breathe. Michael rushed to her side, gripping her shoulders firmly. Hey, look at me, breathe, Chioma. You are safe here. I won't let anyone hurt you, he said, his voice firm, protective. But there was an undertone of fear even he couldn't fully mask. But deep down, Michael knew the truth. Brian wasn't a man you could fight with fists. Brian was a man who fought with power, money, influence, and the law itself. And when men like that wanted something, or someone, they would burn the entire city to get it. Michael paced, running his hands through his hair, his mind racing for solutions. We need to move you, we can't stay here, he finally said. Not the market, not anywhere public. We need somewhere nobody would think to look. Chioma nodded, her hands trembling as she tried to steady her breathing. But her belly throbbed with fear-induced tension. Her baby was moving, kicking, as if sensing the danger. Her eyes watered. Please. Michael, please don't let him find me. I can't go back. I can't survive there again. Her voice broke completely, her body sagging into his arms. And Michael held her like someone holding a fragile piece of glass, knowing that both her body and her spirit were cracked in more places than he could count. That night, as the moon hung low over the city, Chioma and Michael quietly made their way through back alleys, avoiding the main roads. Every shadow made Chioma flinch. Every sound felt like a threat. Eventually, they found temporary refuge in the small compound of an elderly man named Papa Dyke, a longtime friend of Michael's late father. The old man was known for being a recluse, quiet, wise, and always minding his business. As Chioma sat on the wooden bench outside his tiny house, Papa Dyke studied her quietly, his tired eyes scanning her face, then resting on her belly. After a long silence, he finally spoke in a raspy voice. What is your name, child? Chioma cleared her throat. Chioma Nwokoi. At that, the old man's eyes flickered with something. Recognition and pain. Nwokoi, he muttered under his breath. He leaned back, stroking his gray beard as if digging through decades of memory. Is your father's name? Chibuzer Nwokoi. Chioma's head snapped up, her lips parted in shock. Yes. How do you know him? Papa Dyke's hands trembled slightly as he nodded. I knew it. You are his daughter. Oh, my child, his face darkened, and his eyes misted over. Your father was a good man, one of the best men I ever knew. But his downfall, it wasn't an accident. Chioma's heartbeat thundered in her ears. Her hands tightened around her belly. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Michael leaned closer, sensing that something far bigger was about to unfold. Papa Dyke sighed heavily, wiping his eyes. Years ago, your father owned one of the largest distribution companies in Lagos. Honest, hard-working, but he had enemies. Powerful enemies. One of them was Brian's father. Chioma gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Yes, the old man continued. Brian's father, he crushed your father's business. Framed him for crimes he didn't commit. Faked documents, bribed judges, paid off the police. Your father fought. Oh, he fought hard. But in the end, they ruined him. Bankrupted him. Your parents were forced into hiding, and when the sickness came, they had nothing left. Nothing. Papa Dyke's hands trembled as he continued. Your marriage to Brian, it wasn't fate. It was the final wound. Whether Brian knew or not, you were married into the very family that destroyed yours. Chioma broke. Her hands gripped her belly as tears spilled freely. My God, what kind of cruel destiny is this? Her entire body shook and Michael, unable to hold back, wrapped his arms around her tightly. Her sobs echoed into the night, the cries of a woman who had just realized she wasn't just running from a cruel husband. She was running from the ghosts of a destroyed past. The next morning was heavy, not with rain, but with tension so thick it strangled every breath Chioma took. She sat outside Papa Dyke's little house, her hands protectively circling her belly, her mind racing endlessly. Sleep had barely visited her. Every time her eyes closed, she saw Brian's face contorted with rage, heard the echo of his threats, felt the phantom pain of the kicks that nearly ended her and her unborn child. Papa Dyke's revelation the night before weighed heavier than anything she had ever carried. I'm married into the family that killed my parents, the thought repeated like a cruel mantra, robbing her of peace. Her hands trembled, her stomach twisted. The baby kicked, a small but firm reminder that she wasn't fighting for herself alone anymore. Michael paced nearby, chewing his lower lip as he scrolled through his phone. He had called a few trusted friends to find a safer place, but the news was worse than they expected. Brian's men were closing in. They've searched the entire market, Michael said through gritted teeth, his fingers clenched around the phone like it was the neck of the problem itself. 2 shops were shut down because the owners refused to answer their questions. Yesterday, someone in the next compound was dragged out for simply mentioning seeing a pregnant girl. His voice cracked between frustration and helplessness. Papa Dyke sighed heavily from his seat, tapping his cane against the floor. It's not safe here anymore, my children, the old man muttered. The boy is right. Brian's reach is longer than I ever thought. Michael kicked at the dirt floor, his voice filled with anger. It's like he owns this entire city. The police, the media, everyone bends to his money. He looked at Chioma, whose eyes were glossy with tears she refused to let fall. But not me. Not us. He won't have you. I swear on my life. The sound of distant engines interrupted them, not the harmless hum of traffic, but the aggressive roar of multiple SUVs pulling up at the junction. Chioma froze, her breath catching in her throat. Michael's eyes darted toward the road beyond the fence, his muscles instantly tensing. He didn't need confirmation. He knew. They found us. His voice was low but sharp. Papa Dyke stood slowly, gripping his cane, his old eyes narrowing. Take the back exit. Through the bush path. It leads to the mechanic's old storage yard. No one knows it still exists, he said firmly. Michael grabbed Chioma's hand without hesitation. Come on. Now. Chioma stood, but her knees threatened to give out. Her legs trembled as fear surged through her veins like wildfire. As the sound of heavy boots stomping into the compound reached her ears, a scream rose in her throat, but she swallowed it down. There was no time for screaming, only time for running. Michael dragged Chioma through the narrow path behind Papa Dyke's house, both of them moving as fast as her swollen belly would allow. Her breaths came in desperate, ragged gasps. Her legs burned. Her heart felt like it would explode out of her chest. But the sound of men shouting behind them, angry, searching, pushed her forward. Her fingers dug into Michael's palm, clinging like her life depended on it. Faster, Chioma, faster, Michael urged, glancing back, his heart pounding. But fate was cruel. Just as they reached the main road, a black SUV screeched around the corner, nearly colliding with them. Before Michael could react, 2 men jumped out. One lunged for Chioma's arm, grabbing her so roughly that she nearly fell. Let me go, she screamed, struggling with all her might. But the man's grip was ironclad. Leave her alone, Michael shouted, charging at the man. His fist collided with the man's jaw, sending him stumbling. Another guard jumped on Michael, and soon they were wrestling violently in the dirt. Passers-by began to gather. People pulled out their phones, recording. The scene escalated quickly, a heavily pregnant woman being dragged by men in suits, while a young man fought like a lion to protect her. Chioma screamed, fought, and kicked as the guard tried to force her toward the SUV. Stop. Stop. You have no right, someone in the crowd yelled. Others joined in, some shouting, others capturing every second. Brian's men, realizing the growing attention, tried to act calm, lying loudly. This is a family matter. Mind your business. But the crowd wasn't convinced. If it's a family matter, why are you dragging a pregnant woman like a thief? A market woman roared. More voices joined in, and soon the street erupted into chaos. Someone hurled a stone at the SUV. Another grabbed a stick, waving it. The guards, overwhelmed, tried to hold their ground, but Michael, bleeding, panting, furious, grabbed Chioma and pulled her back with every ounce of strength left in him. The crowd closed ranks, shielding them. "You can't take her. This isn't right," someone shouted. Phones captured every second. The punches, the kicks, the tears streaming down Chioma's face as she sobbed. "Please, please don't let them take me back." The footage spread like wildfire on social media within minutes. The world was finally seeing the monster behind the billionaire's polished smile. Far away from the chaos on the streets, in the marble-clad office of Brian Okafor, his lawyer paced nervously, holding his phone tightly. "Brian, we have a problem," the lawyer stammered, sweat beading his forehead despite the air conditioning. Brian, lounging lazily with a glass of whiskey, raised a brow. "What is it now?" he asked coldly. The lawyer gulped, pushing his glasses up his nose. "There's footage. Footage of your men attacking Chioma. It's everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, even the news outlets are picking it up. It's gone viral. People are outraged. Human rights activists are getting involved. They're saying it's gender-based violence, abuse, and he stammered, unable to finish. Brian sat up slowly, his face darkening. "So what? I'll pay them off. Get them to delete it," he snapped. The lawyer shook his head quickly. "No, Brian, it's not that simple. I've gone through the contract again. Your father's will. There's a clause, a hidden one we didn't pay attention to." He opened the legal document on his tablet, scrolling frantically before pointing to a section highlighted in red. "Right here. It states that if any form of abuse, physical, emotional, or psychological, is proven against your wife, the contract becomes void. You forfeit the inheritance." And with the video footage, it's proof. More than enough. If this goes to court, you won't just lose Chioma. You'll lose the company. Everything. For the first time, Brian's arrogant facade cracked. His hands tightened around the whiskey glass until it shattered in his grip, blood mixing with the alcohol dripping onto the white carpet. His heart raced. His pulse thundered in his ears. "No," he whispered. "No. This isn't happening. I won't lose. I can't." His breaths grew ragged. The thought of losing everything, the company, the power, the wealth, over the very woman he had treated like dirt, it was unthinkable, unbearable. Rage surged through him, but so did panic. His mind raced for solutions. Buy the media, threaten the activists, sue anyone who shared the video. But deep down, for the first time, Brian Okafor, the untouchable billionaire, felt something he hadn't felt in years. Fear. Real, choking fear. Because his empire was crumbling, and the woman he thought was powerless now held the key to his downfall. The public backlash was like a raging wildfire. News outlets played the video repeatedly, the clip of Chioma being dragged, screaming, while heavily pregnant, and Michael fighting like a wounded lion to save her. Activists flooded the internet. Hashtags like #ProtectChioma, #BillionaireAbuse, and #JusticeForChioma trended globally. Women groups, lawyers, and social commentators ripped Brian apart, calling for investigations, arrests, and a thorough review of his company's practices. For the first time in his life, Brian wasn't the predator. He was the prey. His board of directors started holding secret meetings. Investors began pulling out. His mother's calls went unanswered as Brian sat alone in his darkened study, gripping a bottle of whiskey, his hands shaking. His empire was crumbling, all because of the woman he thought was powerless. Then, as if a light bulb flickered in the darkest corners of his mind, Brian sat up. His lawyer's words echoed. The contract becomes void if any form of abuse is proven. But what if he could undo the damage, not legally, but publicly? His PR team was called immediately. Within hours, every major blog, TV station, and influencer was flooded with a different story. "I love my wife," Brian breaks silence, accompanied by a stage video. Brian, dressed in a simple shirt, sat before a camera with fake tears pooling in his eyes. I was angry not at her, but at the pressure of life. I love Chioma, she's my wife, the mother of my child. I've made mistakes, but please let us heal privately. His voice broke. His face looked pained. But none of it was real. It was the sweetest lie. The public response was mixed. Some were fooled, calling for forgiveness, saying things like no marriage is perfect. Others, especially women, saw right through it. Where was this energy when you kicked a pregnant woman? But Brian didn't care about convincing everyone, just enough to buy time. Then came the masterstroke. He went on national television, announcing that he forgave Chioma for running away out of fear and misunderstanding. He dropped lawsuits against Michael, claiming he was only helping someone in distress. He painted himself as a loving, misunderstood husband. And then, like a wolf draped in sheep's clothing, he reached out to Chioma directly. His voice over the phone was soft, shaky, laced with a poison so sweet it almost sounded like medicine. Chioma, I've changed. Please come home. I know I've hurt you, but let's start over, for the baby, for us. And the worst part? As broken, tired, and desperate for safety as she was, Chioma started to believe him. Michael sat quietly by the window, watching Chioma pace back and forth, her hands rubbing her belly anxiously. Her face was a battlefield of emotions, confusion, pain, doubt, and fear. I don't know what to do, Michael, she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. Part of me wants to believe him. Maybe he's really changed. Maybe for the baby's sake. Her voice cracked. Michael's jaw tightened. His fists curled. He wanted to scream, to grab her shoulders and shake the doubt out of her. But how could he? He wasn't the father of her child. He wasn't her husband. He was just the man who happened to care, the man who stood by her when no one else did. His voice came out softer than he expected. Chioma, people like Brian don't change. They pretend. They deceive. But it's your choice. Just promise me you'll be careful. His voice cracked at the end. His heart broke silently. Chioma sobbed as she hugged Michael, whispering, "Thank you for everything," her belly pressed against him. And for a brief moment he felt like the father, like the protector, like the man who should have been her husband. But reality was cruel. Hours later, Brian's private car arrived. Not the intimidating black SUVs, but a simple sedan, driven by his PR assistant, who smiled sweetly as if they hadn't been part of the terror squad days ago. Chioma hugged Michael one last time, her tears soaking his shirt. "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing," she whispered. Michael gripped her hand tightly. "Just remember, if you ever need me again, I'll be here, no matter what." His voice broke completely, and so did hers. As she stepped into the car, it felt less like a ride home, and more like stepping back into a lion's den. The mansion looked different when she arrived. Flowers decorated the front, the driveway was swept clean, and soft music played from inside. Brian stood at the entrance, dressed in a simple white shirt and jeans, smiling like the devil who had just learned to fake innocence. "Welcome home, baby," he said, pulling her into a gentle hug. For a moment, Chioma's broken heart fluttered. Just maybe he had changed. He guided her inside, showing her the redecorated bedroom, the big one, no longer the servants' quarters. Food was prepared, her favorite dishes. He rubbed her belly, kissed her forehead, and whispered promises of a better future. But as the days passed, the smiles grew thinner, the patience wore down, and slowly the mask began to crack. The monster wasn't gone. He had just been waiting for her to return. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.